Crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. There's a souvenir for you. And one for you. I'll show you who I am and what I am.
The Invisible Man is a science fiction horror film released by Universal Pictures on October 31st, 1933. Based on the H.G. Wells novel of the same name, this is one of the many classic horror movies that Universal built its reputation on during the Hollywood Golden Age. Having been released on the heels of what would become some of Universal's most iconic properties, The Invisible Man would enjoy a great deal of fame, being financially and critically successful enough to see the Invisible Man's likeness appear in a series of spin-offs, spiritual sequels, and much later on, a remake released in 2020. So as a minor icon of the movie monster movement of old, what does The Invisible Man do to make it the cinematic landmark of an era? Well, the truth is, this is a very campy movie. And the truth is, that's not actually a bad thing. Yes, the movie heavily plays up the idea of how terrifying the Invisible Man is. Yes, its explanations of the chemical monocaine and how stark raving mad it makes you are over the top. And yes, the concerned, weepy lover inserted by some googly-eyed movie executive paints a picture of a movie that's too silly to work. And despite some of the early scenes being rather obnoxious with how scared of invisibility the locals get, the silliness of the concept mostly works to the movie's advantage. The story displayed on screen is a well-told one, and it follows a pretty natural progression that never leaves you questioning much. Starting off isolated and wanting to avoid contact, you understand when the man finally snaps at the poking and prodding of others, leading him to create some minor mayhem. When he begins to wax philosophical about his intentions to rule the world with this power of invisibility, though admittedly pretty hammy, you're inclined to believe he'll do it, as he actively organizes and exploits every resource he can to turn this project into a reality. When he is inevitably stabbed in the back, in fairness for openly contemplating treason and murder, you can see why he would fly into a rage and go on a spree of complete and utter destruction. So as we watch in detail this man's descent into madness, and understanding full well why it's happening, it's pretty easy to be taken in by his antics of riding a bicycle through town to the shock of onlookers, or pantsing a police constable with superhuman strength, or casually derailing a train and killing hundreds in the process. Okay, that last part was a bit dark, but by this point the man is so callous and self-absorbed we kinda knew something like that was coming. Claude Rains completely owns the role with sinister glee. His voice alone is honestly enough to make this movie great, with his ability to transition from domineering, unhinged fury to giddy, uncontrollable laughter, being simultaneously hilarious but disturbing. Every passing minute you see his state of mind become more and more frayed. As we see him toy with the power his invisibility grants him, we come to realize his espousals of world domination may not be completely delusional. And once he begins on his self-coined reign of terror, we are made to understand how real and how dangerous the Invisible Man can be. The other actors, though somewhat less involved, fill out the story very well. William Harrigan as Mr. Kemp, the Invisible Man's frazzled hostage, plays his role perfectly, with his betrayal of the Invisible Man proving pivotal in his descent into madness. Gloria Stewart, while an obvious love interest insert, proves to be substantial, helping to humanize the Invisible Man and fleshing out his cause to go to such great lengths in the name of science, even if it comes at the expense of body and mind. The background characters, though mostly present to provide slapstick cannon fodder for the Invisible Man's deranged antics, prove to be surprisingly competent once the real terror begins. Thanks to a tight and well thought out script, the mob are actually able to organize pretty well, implementing several ingenious ways to box the Invisible Man in and draw him out as they search. Though they are not always successful, we see they're able to mend their strategy accordingly, and though it takes thousands in the end, they are finally able to hunt him down and take him down. Though it may be a campy movie, you can't accuse it of not being a fun one. There really isn't much to say for the camera work. It's pretty basic in its approach, never moving around too much and keeping to pretty basic transitions. What is somewhat impressive, though, is the special effects used to show the Invisible Man's invisibility. I'm not sure what tricks they used to make this happen, but every time you see him at work, whether he be lighting a cigarette in thin air, or latching a door shut, or making a bicycle look like it's riding itself, the visual trickery is pretty effective for the most part. Yeah, sometimes the shimmer around his head that appears when he's derobing is a bit distracting, but otherwise the invisibility's pretty well executed. The pacing is also pretty solid for the most part. Though it's a bit slow in the first act of the movie, it's in service to making the Invisible Man's situation make sense. Once the invisibility kicks in, however, this movie blasts forward at a pretty even keel, keeping a good balance between character moments, action horror carnage, and the heroes of the police and the mob trying to find a way to put a stop to him once and for all. Though the runtime may be a short one, it's one you'll be getting the most out of. The soundtrack is also pretty sparse here. This is an era of movie making where the elements of what makes a modern movie were just starting to be understood and combined. So the soundtrack we do get is mostly used towards the end of the movie when the tension is meant to reach its peak. Now that said, it does a pretty good job of reflecting the suspense and unease. The only real complaint to make is that on occasion, some of the scenes will just end. It'll seem like there's meant to be more to come, and then, as the older movies tend to do, you'll be cross-cutting to the next thing without really knowing why. It doesn't happen in any of the important scenes, thankfully, but in the moments of rising action where the people are seeking to find him, it's a bit distracting to have a room full of reporters asking questions and collaborating with the police inspector cut away in the middle of their consultation. I mean, that said, if cutting away to a more important event in the middle of a conversation was a superpower, I would enjoy work meetings a hell of a lot more. The final rating for The Unseen Hand of Overtly Destructive Pranks is 8 out of 10. Though a product of its time with its campy and bombastic delivery, it works well courtesy of the visual spectacle of it all and the actor's dedication to the lunacy. Delivering on both chills and chuckles, this is a movie that not only does its source material justice, but earns its place in the pantheon of spooky classics that helped to shape movie history.